Craig Taylor. And we look forward to your performance.
Hello, my name is Maggie Call, and the title of my performance is How I Spent My Summer Vacation, Triumph and Tragedy at Gettysburg. Oh, hello! Welcome to my classroom. My name is Sally Myers. Sorry for the disorder, but as you can see, I'm readying my classroom for the school year. Ah, the assignment. The one that strikes dread in the heart of every returning pupil. How I spent my summer vacation. Well, let me tell you how I spent my summer vacation. Gettysburg in 1863 was a thriving little community with 2,400 inhabitants. As one of my former pupils, Tilly Pierce, once said, Gettysburg was relatively unknown to the outside world, save to those interested in the Lutheran College and Theological Seminary here located. Daily reports of the coming of the rebels kept us in a constant fever of excitement. On June 26th, they came, spent the night, and passed through, burning bridges and spreading consternation everywhere. Little we dreamed of the far greater horrors that were in store for us. On June 30th, that all changed. Most of the citizens turned out to welcome John Buford and his 3,500 troops as they marched through Gettysburg on the prowl for rebels. The fine folk of Gettysburg were experiencing a brief respite of elation. We had received several reports over the past few weeks that the rebels were planning to invade Pennsylvania, and thus we welcomed Buford with bugle corps and full parade turnout. On Wednesday, July 1st, the storm broke. We were brimming over with patriotic enthusiasm. Then came the order. Women and children to the cellars! The rebels will shell the town! We lost little time in obeying the order. My home was in the direct path of the retreat of the Union Army. From 4 to 6, we were in the cellar. And those 2 hours I can never forget. The noise of the battle was enough to shake the stoutest apart. Now, I know I was there, but since you weren't, let me tell you a few of the less commonly told stories of what occurred over the course of those 3 terrifying days. Oh, Chimel Finnegan, let me tell you his story. On July 1st, Chimel Finnegan and his men of the 11th Corps valiantly faced General George Dole's Georgia Brigade until they received an order to retreat. As his men fell back, Chimel Finnegan remained in the rear in hopes to retain order and cover for his retiring men. However, as men flooded the streets to attack the tired and disorganized Union troops, Chimel Finnegan fled the scene on foot because his horse had been shot and he was being chased by angry rebel soldiers who sought his head. Then, after faking his death after a blow to the head, instead of returning to his regiment, he hid in a shed next to a hogswell barrel in a local backyard, eating only leftover scraps from the pigs. 3 days later, he emerged from hiding and returned to his men, who rejoiced because they thought that he was dead. Nevertheless, he is remembered as the general who hid from the fight. In contrast, a 69-year-old resident of Gettysburg, John Burns, took up his old flintlock musket and powder horn to go aid the Union troops. Burns was furious that the rebels were attacking his town. In his blue swallowtail coat and high silk hat, he rushed off to McPherson's Ridge, where he was instructed to fire from behind a line of trees. Burns fired off 28 rounds of ammunition, of which he claimed 3 shots found their marks. In this process, Burns was wounded and left for dead by Union troops. However, upon discovery by Confederate soldiers, he told them that he had been wounded while searching for a lost cow, and thus they returned him to his home where he is celebrated as a war hero and has even received recognition from President Lincoln himself. As the battle on July 2nd raged south of town, Dr. Fulton walked into my home and said to me and my sisters, "Girls, you must come up to the churches and help us. Our boys are suffering terribly from want of attention." My initial reaction to Dr. Fulton's request was uncertainty, for it didn't seem as though I could do such work. But I went. The doctor led the way to the Catholic Church, which, like all other public buildings, had been turned into a hospital. Everywhere was blood, and on all sides we heard groans and cries and prayers. I knelt by one man and asked, "What can I do for you?" "Nothing," he replied, "for I'm going to die." I went out on the church steps and cried. Meanwhile, on Cemetery Hill, Union General Dan Sickles was experiencing tremendous anxiety on account of his position. He felt it left him vulnerable to attack from the Confederates. He requested to move to a seemingly safer area, but this request was denied by his superior officer. Then, at 3 p.m., against his orders, Sickles pushed forward to take the position. This resulted in his men being stretched across the ridge above the peach orchard, and the remaining portion stationed near Devil's Den. Furious, General Meade told Sickles to hold out as best he could, and the army would send as much aid as possible. Sickles' corps tragically lost many of its number, and he was never viewed the same by his fellow commanders. As you can tell, I have no use for the man. At the same time Sickles' forces were being attacked, however, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, a professor, seminarian, and newly appointed colonel of the 20th Maine, led his regiment of lumberjacks and fishermen to Little Round Top. His superior officer then said, "This is the left flank of the entire Army of the Potomac. You must hold this ground at all costs." It's exactly what Chamberlain did. When faced by General William Oakes in the 15th Alabama, he and his men held their ground steadfastly. However, after a couple of charges, his men were down to their last cartridges, and the Confederates were rallying for another charge. Chamberlain, desperate to hold his ground, ordered his men to fix bayonets and charge down into the Confederate line. Then, with an animal roar, the entire 20th Maine swept forward, led by Chamberlain with drawn sword. This caused the rebels to pause and brace themselves for attack just long enough to allow Union sharpshooters hidden in the surrounding woods to fire upon their rear, causing the rebels to retreat. The 20th Maine won their lonely fight, but at a tragically high cost of 130 of its 386 men. That night, as I was preparing to retire to my bed, a strange sound filled the night air. As I stopped to listen, I recognized a familiar tune. "Come ye disconsolate, why ye languish?" I later heard it was being sung by a wounded Confederate soldier, stuck between enemy lines in the wheat field. His voice echoed across the valley and comforted hundreds of wounded. Early in the morning of July 3rd, the only civilian casualty at Gettysburg occurred. One of my dear friends, Jenny Wade, was struck through the shoulder by a stray mini ball fired by skirmishers outside her sister's home. She had been preparing bread dough to bake for hungry soldiers, and a photograph of her sweetheart, Jack Skelly, was found in her apron pocket. Jack Skelly died later on July 12th, never hearing of his sweetheart's death. That afternoon, after a huge artillery duel, the Confederates chose to execute a frontal infantry assault on an enemy commanding an elevated entrenched position. Eyewitnesses remembered the orderly ranks of Confederate soldiers forming their line almost a mile across and marching across open fields and then uphill to meet the Federal guns as one of the most stirring sights of their lives. With the failure of this grand attack, the battle ended, with both sides battered into exhaustion. Gettysburg proved to be the bloodiest battle of the Civil War. 23,000 of 97,000 Union soldiers were killed, and 28,000 of these 75,000 were killed, wounded, or captured. Lee's invasion of the North had been a costly failure. For both sides, the Battle of Gettysburg was a major turning point. General Meade, after only 3 days in command, had triumphed in defeating the seemingly invincible Robert E. Lee. The Federal forces had successfully prevented the rebels from invading Washington. However, the Battle of Gettysburg affected Northern citizens in many ways as well. A war that had previously only been fought in the seemingly distant South had now crossed into Northern territory, and the war suddenly became more real for those not previously involved. The 3-day Battle of Gettysburg took place on farms owned by private citizens that surrounded our crossroads town. 172,000 men and 500 cannons invaded our city. In November 1863, President Abraham Lincoln visited our small town to dedicate the burial ground of some of these brave men who sacrificed their lives for their country and its cause. After the battle, almost 10,000 dead lay on the battlefield, 4 times our own town's population. As the president spoke, the faces and scenes of the battle flashed before me, and these words stayed with me. We cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men living and dead who struggled here had consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. I would not care to live that summer again, and I would not willingly erase it from my life's experience, but I shall always be thankful that I was permitted to minister to the wants and soothe the last hours of some of those brave men who lay suffering and dying for the dear old flag. Oh my, look at the time. I've been rambling much too long. Thank you for listening to me, but I really must get back to my classroom.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I'd like to ask you a few questions. We'll start with, are you ready? Yes.
Well, sure. I've always got questions. Chimel Finnegan, do you know where the name comes from?
It's German, so...
No kidding.
Yeah. So President Lincoln...
Wait, softball, right up here. You know what that's called? That's a dumb teacher question. Right there, serious. Because you ask that kind of a question in class, and you get what you get. So, let's try again. Do you know what the breakdown of the name, where it comes from?
No, I don't. I do know that it's German. I know that President Lincoln was really struggling to get German and Hessian votes when he was running for president, and he was struggling about worrying for re-election the next year because he was worried that if he didn't get re-elected, the country would fall apart. So in order to kind of regain trust with the Hessian and German citizens, he would promote German military officers to higher positions of command to show that German citizens in the U.S. could also go to those heights. So when he was given a list of names that could be promoted to general, like Chimel Finnegan, he looked at the list for like a couple of minutes and was like, that guy's my man, Chimel Finnegan. And then the Secretary of War was like, there's better guys than Chimel Finnegan on this list. And Lincoln goes, but they don't have his name. And then he spins around in his chair just saying Chimel Finnegan, Chimel Finnegan, Chimel Finnegan for like 4 times. So.
And I think a pfennig is a unit of measure or currency. Put a P in front of it.
Yes.
That's where it comes from.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's a little bit more commercial.
I think it's a very interesting device you use to have this as a story of your summer vacation. So I looked in your presentation here and found out you did actually spend time at Gettysburg a couple of years ago. What were your impressions as you looked at it before you started going into all of this?
So it's very interesting to me because I went 2 years ago to the battlefield, and then I went Saturday to the battlefield again, kind of because I had done the research and I wanted to see. But I remember 2 years ago, I didn't know very much about the place. I knew that it was like the biggest battle, or the bloodiest battle of the Civil War type of thing, the stuff you learn in like 5th grade when you're like in a U.S. history curriculum. But I remember walking onto the battlefield and looking at the little round top, the 20th Main Monument, and just being like, it finally hit me that, whoa, like people actually had to make these critical decisions. People actually sacrificed their lives on that rock type of thing, that I could see it. And so it's really stuck with me because I had seen a place where men had died for a cause. And so I was still kind of in history fair mindset or history day mindset, and so I was like, this would be an amazing project to do. I could get to know the battlefield more. And then when the theme was released this year, Triumph and Tragedy, I was like, it's the year to do Gettysburg, and because it fit the theme so many ways in my mind. And so then when I did it and I got this far and we were coming to DC, I was like, we have to go back, I have to go back. And I went back Saturday and was looking around, and I was like, this meant a lot to me 2 years ago. It means so much more to me now. Because I could look there and I could be like, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain stood there. Sickles stood here. This is where his men died. This is where Jenny Wade was shot through her door. This is where all of it happened, and it suddenly all clicked to me that it was such an important piece of history, and no one knows the stories that go behind it. They know the battle tactics. They know where people stood. They don't know the pain and the stories that are lesser known that go along with it. And so I knew that I had to do it some justice.
What were your most useful primary sources and most useful secondary sources?
So my most useful secondary source actually helped me find my most useful primary source. It's mentioned in the bibliography. The Auto Tour disc is, I think, what it's called. It's a disc you put in your car as you drive around the battlefield. And we had me and my family, when we had gone back, we had put it in and just listened to the stories. And I remember like driving around the battlefield and being like, oh, that's cool, oh, that's cool, oh, that's cool. But when I picked this project, I was like, I should listen to that again, because it had some cool stories and it kind of gave perspective to the battlefield. And so I was listening to it, and it talked about Jenny Wade, and I was like, that would be really cool to put in my presentation. And then it talks about Chamberlain, and I'm like, oh, that would be really cool to put in my presentation. And so this compilation of stories from the Auto Tour actually gave me most of the stories that I used in this presentation. And it also quotes directly from my character, Sally Myers, which I was like, I was looking at it and I decided it would be really cool to do my performance from a teacher's perspective after, and she lived through the battle and was like a nurse during it. And so she would have had her perspective, but as a nurse, she would have had soldiers' perspectives. And then because it's after the battle is over and Lincoln has come, she would have had more time to compile stories from outward sources, newspaper sources, things like that, that would have already known like the whole battle. Because if you only do one person or like one soldier, they only know that one portion. And so I used Sally Myers to kind of do a compilation. But when I decided that that was my character, I looked her up and found her diaries and purchased those because they were a primary source that were her writings during and before and after the battle that her son had transcribed, because the original diaries were actually stolen and we still don't have them to this day. But that was my most useful primary one because it gave me the civilian perspective that I really needed to make my presentation go full circle.
Thank you very much. This is very, being here so close to that piece of history, and here in Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, there's so much for history. It's a wonderful presentation. Thank you so very much.